At 11:37 on a Tuesday night, Mike Donnelly stands barefoot in his kitchen, turning a Phillips screwdriver into the loose brass handle of a drawer that has been annoying him since March. He is wearing an old brown Carhartt sweatshirt with paint on one cuff, faded jeans, and the expression of a man who has already decided the drawer is not winning. The sink smells like black coffee and dish soap. From the garage comes the faint oil and dust smell of a mower he fixed last weekend because buying a new one felt like surrender with a receipt. His chipped white mug sits upside down on a towel, same mug since 1998. Nobody knows why. Nobody needs to. By the door. His keys are in the same ceramic bowl they have occupied for 12 years. His boots are lined up beneath them, heels even, toes angled toward morning. Not military neat, not decorative neat. Just the kind of order a man builds when nobody else is coming through the door to find the thing he lost. The drawer handle clicks tight. Mike tests it twice. Then, for no useful reason, he remembers a sentence from 1989, a foreman at a loading dock outside Dayton, Ohio, telling him in front of 3 older men that he was too slow to be worth the trouble. Mike was 19. He had been working there 6 days. The foreman never corrected it, never said he was wrong, never pulled him aside later. Nobody did that sort of thing then, unless a lawsuit had already been invented around it. So Mike did what he learned to do. He got faster. That was the apology. Not the words, not the admission, not the soft little ritual where someone circles back, takes responsibility, and restores the damage they caused. That belonged to some other version of adulthood. Probably one with better carpet and an HR department that used phrases nobody trusted. Mike grew up before apologies became public currency. He grew up around adults who snapped, forgot, drank, left, remarried, worked late, changed the subject, and expected the kid to understand the weather in the house without asking for a forecast. You did not wait for sorry. You watched behavior. You noticed who came back and who did not. You noticed who fixed the screen door after slamming it and who simply walked past the damage for the next 9 years. You learned the difference between regret and maintenance. The drawer is solid now. The house is quiet, and that quiet is where this story actually begins. Before anyone puts the usual label on Mike, get the cheap diagnosis out of the way. Bitter, cold, emotionally unavailable. One of those older men who keeps score, remembers too much, and trusts apologies about as much as he trusts extended warranties sold over the phone. It is a neat story. Also lazy, because an apology is not just a polite noise people make after damage. Roy J. Lewicki, Beth Poland, and Robert B. Lount looked at this directly in their 2016 paper, an exploration of the structure of effective apologies, published in Negotiation and Conflict Management Research. Across 2 experiments with 755 participants, they tested what actually makes an apology work, not vibes, structure. The strongest apologies were not the ones with the softest tone or the longest emotional paragraph. They contained specific parts: accepting responsibility, offering repair, expressing regret, explaining what happened, showing repentance, and asking forgiveness. Most important, responsibility and repair carried serious weight. In plain English, people believed apologies more when the offender owned the damage and tried to fix it. That matters here. A man like Mike did not learn to distrust apologies because he was born suspicious. He learned it the old-fashioned way, through repeated exposure to adults who said sorry when cornered, then changed absolutely nothing. A parent snapped and called it stress. A boss humiliated him and called it training. A spouse rewrote history and called it communication. Very modern, very exhausting. So he began separating words from repair. He listened, sure. He was not a statue, but he watched what happened after the words. Did the behavior change? Did the person come back with tools, time, money, effort, restraint? Did the drawer get fixed, or did everyone stand around admiring the apology? That is not bitterness. That is pattern recognition. And once you understand that, the larger cultural verdict against men like him starts to look less like insight and more like paperwork filed by people who never checked the drawer. The verdict arrived, dressed as concern. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, American workplaces, schools, magazines, talk shows, and training rooms had developed a tidy theory about men like Mike. If he did not explain himself, he was closed off. If he did not perform regret in the approved language, he lacked emotional intelligence. If he kept distance from institutional advice, he was defensive. Convenient. The same culture that ignored Gen X when it was young became confident about diagnosing it when it got older. Pew Research once called Generation X America's neglected middle child, wedged between the massive boomer story and endless millennial analysis industry. That phrase matters, because neglect does not only happen in families, it happens in public memory. Some generations get monuments, some get think pieces. Gen X got a key, a microwave burrito, and instructions not to let anyone know they were home alone. Then came the verdict. The quiet man was antisocial. The skeptical man was immature. The self-contained man was damaged goods with decent credit and a garage full of tools. Human resources had a worksheet. Daytime television had a guest expert. Social media later added captions, because apparently civilization needed emotional subtitles. But these institutions missed the basic point. Mike did not reject repair. He rejected counterfeit repair. He was not offended by accountability. He was offended by speeches that substituted for it. That is different. A man raised in a world of rising divorce, layoffs, Cold War noise, vanishing pensions, and adults working double shifts was not trained to believe every polished sentence. He was trained to notice outcomes. Did the lights stay on? Did rent get paid? Did the person who said, "I'll be there," show up? That was the scoreboard. So when modern culture looked at his restraint and called it damage, it was reading the receipt without checking the purchase. The verdict was wrong because the evidence was incomplete. To understand why, you have to go back to the first place he learned not to ask twice. In October of 1978, at 3:46 inches the afternoon, a boy like Mike turns a house key in the lock of a split-level home outside Dayton. The air inside smells like cold carpet, cigarette smoke trapped in curtains, and the last half-inch of Folgers sitting in the glass pot. The television is off. The refrigerator hums like it owns the place. Nobody says hello. He drops his backpack by the stairs, locks the door behind him, and checks the front window without thinking. Not because someone taught him a safety protocol, because he had absorbed the rules through repetition, warning, and the strange adult confidence that a 10-year-old could manage the perimeter until dinner. The key hangs from a shoelace under his shirt. That was not a metaphor then. It was hardware. He knows the script if the phone rings. Mom's in the shower. He knows not to open the door. He knows how long to microwave a frozen dinner without melting the tray into something NASA might study. He knows where the flashlight is when the power flickers. And he knows that complaining about being alone will be treated like poor scheduling on his part. This was the training program. No brochure, no enrollment form. Just an empty house, 2 working parents, a divorce nobody explained well, and a kid expected to become reliable before he became tall. In 1996, researcher K.P. Leung reviewed the literature on latchkey children in the journal Child Welfare. The picture was not simple. Self-care could be linked with independence and responsibility, but also loneliness, boredom, fear, and trouble when supervision was too thin. That nuance matters because Gen X men do not need their childhood turned into a sob story. They need it described accurately. Later, a longitudinal study by O.E. Atherton and colleagues followed 674 children and found that unsupervised self-care predicted later conduct problems. Again, the point is not to declare every latchkey kid doomed. Plenty of them became competent adults with socket sets, decent credit scores, and a low tolerance for nonsense. The point is calibration. When nobody is home, you learn what adults say matters less than what actually happens. You learn that apologies do not unlock the door. Keys do. You learn that being fine is sometimes just what you call functioning until someone gets home. And for some boys, nobody really came home in the way they were waiting for. Not fully, anyway. An apology is not a mood. It is a repair tool. And like most tools, it becomes useless when someone only waves it around to look civilized. Men like Mike know this without reading a journal article. But the journal article helps because common sense often needs peer review before polite society lets it into the room. Roy J. Lewicki, Beth Polin, and Robert B. Lount studied this in their 2016 paper, An exploration of the structure of effective apologies, published in Negotiation and Conflict Management Research. They did not ask whether apologies sounded nice. Across 2 experiments with 755 participants, they examined which parts of an apology made people more willing to forgive after a trust violation. The answer was not charm. They tested 6 components: expression of regret, explanation of what went wrong, acknowledgement of responsibility, declaration of repentance, offer of repair, and request for forgiveness. The strongest apologies contained more of these elements, but 2 carried special weight. Responsibility mattered. Repair mattered. That is the part Mike would understand immediately. Because when you grew up around adults who could say sorry and then keep doing the same thing, you learned to separate the mouth from the hands. The mouth could apologize. The hands either fixed the damage or they did not. A man who grew up that way does not hear an apology as music. He reads it like a work order. What exactly broke? Who is owning it? What changes after this? This is why cheap apologies irritate him more than open silence. Silence may be rude, but at least it is honest about the absence of repair. A polished apology with no changed behavior is worse. It tries to collect moral credit without paying the invoice. That is not forgiveness. That is accounting fraud with better lighting. The research matters because it proves that his skepticism is not primitive. It is precise. Lewicki and his colleagues showed that people respond to apologies when the structure signals real accountability. So, when a Gen X man ignores the performance and watches the follow-through, he is not failing some modern emotional test. He is using the part that actually predicts trust. This applies to bosses, parents, siblings, ex-wives, institutions, and the occasional contractor who says, "We should be there between 8 and noon," which is less a schedule than a theological position. Mike does not need perfect people. What he rejects is the little performance after the error, the clean sentence placed neatly over the mess, as if language alone could repaint the wall, repay the money, or unsay the sentence that stayed in a man's head for 30 years. He needs signals that match behavior, words that come with weight, and repair that leaves the drawer tighter than it was before. There is a name for the life that forms around that kind of math: the unapologized life. Not a diagnosis, not a slogan printed on a mug by someone who discovered masculinity last Thursday. The unapologized life is what happens when a man grows up around repeated small breaks that nobody names, nobody repairs, and nobody circles back to discuss. So he stops budgeting for apology. He invests in competence instead. A boy learns this early. A promise is missed. A parent loses control. A teacher humiliates him in class. A coach calls it discipline. A boss calls it standards. Later, a partner rewrites the argument with the confidence of a press office. Each incident may be small enough to dismiss alone. Together, they teach a man where not to place his weight. Words become light. Behavior becomes load-bearing. The unapologized life does not mean he forgets nothing and forgives no one. That would be too simple. And men like Mike are not simple just because they refuse to narrate themselves for public approval. It means he does not make his stability dependent on someone else finally admitting what happened. He remembers. Then he adjusts. He keeps a private ledger, not because he enjoys bookkeeping, but because pattern recognition is cheaper than getting burned twice. He may still laugh with you. He may still help you move. He may still sit across from you at Christmas dinner and pass the potatoes like civilization has survived worse, because it has. But something recalibrates. Access changes. Trust gets narrower. Promises require evidence. Apologies require repair. And if repair never comes, he does not stand in the emotional lobby waiting for a manager. This is why the drawer matters. Mike tightens what is loose because loose things do not tighten themselves. The handle, the budget, the boundary, the morning routine, the old truck, the parts of life that can still be brought back into working order. The unapologized life is not about refusing connection. It is about refusing counterfeit repair. And once that distinction is clear, his way of caring for people starts to make a different kind of sense. A man living the unapologized life does not usually announce connection. He demonstrates it. Mike will not give a speech about loyalty, but he will drive 40 miles on a Saturday morning because his daughter's Civic is making a sound near the front wheel. He will bring his own jack. his own flashlight, and the old coffee can full of bolts because half of civilization is apparently held together by leftover hardware. He will say, "You've been checking the oil?" That is not criticism. That is affection wearing work gloves. This is where mainstream culture often misreads men like him again. It expects care to arrive face to face, in clean verbal form, preferably with eye contact and a sentence that could be clipped for a podcast. But many Gen X men learned a different method. Shoulder to shoulder, task-based, useful, quiet enough to survive embarrassment. Sociologist Jeffrey Greif studied this directly in his work on male friendship, including interviews with 386 men for his book Buddy System. Greif found that men often describe close friendships through reliability, shared activity, history, trust, and being understood without constant explanation. That matters because it matches the way these men built connection before everyone became a brand consultant for their own emotions. They bond while fixing a fence. They talk beside a grill. They sit in a boat for 3 hours, say 12 words, and somehow both understand more than a group text could accomplish. Nobody writes a poem. The alternator gets replaced. For Mike, intimacy is not confession. It is access. He lets someone use his tools. He answers the phone after 9 p.m. He remembers that you hate hospital parking garages and shows up anyway, pretending he was in the area, a bold claim when the area is 72 miles wide. He chooses connection that proves itself under load. This is not neediness hidden under denim. It is strategy. He trusts forms of care that leave evidence behind. A fixed hinge, a paid bill, a ride home, a porch light left on. And once care is understood as evidence, the old accusation of coldness begins to collapse. What looked like coldness may have been measurement. That is the turn most people miss. Mike is not standing outside life with his arms crossed because he enjoys the posture. He is measuring the load before he steps onto the bridge. Men who grew up without reliable apologies do not become allergic to people. They become careful about weight limits. A promise has weight. A pattern has more. The apology research already told us why. Lewicki, Polin, and Lount found that responsibility and repair mattered most when people judged whether an apology was believable. So when Mike listens less to the sentence and more to what happens afterward, he is not being difficult. He is using the part that predicts trust. The latchkey research gives the other half of the picture. Leung's review showed self-care could build independence and responsibility, even while carrying loneliness, boredom, and risk when adults were absent too long. Atherton and colleagues found that unsupervised self-care could predict later conduct problems. Fair enough. But data does not require melodrama. It says conditions shape behavior, and his conditions were specific. Empty house, working parents, divorce paperwork, Cold War television, factories shrinking, pensions becoming rumors, adults saying, "You'll be fine," which often meant, "Please be fine," because everyone is out of bandwidth. So he became fine in the only measurable way available. He functioned. That is why the old verdict fails. Cold men do not drive across town with jumper cables. Antisocial men do not remember which neighbor needs her trash cans pulled in after knee surgery. Damaged men do not quietly build systems of reliability other people depend on while calling it nothing. This was calibration, not sainthood, not perfection. He can be stubborn. He can hold a grudge past its useful date. He can treat a sincere apology like a suspicious package near the garage. Nobody is nominating him for emotional ambassador to Norway, but the core behavior makes sense. He learned to trust what repeats. He learned to value repair over performance. He learned that words without maintenance are just noise with manners. He also learned that people reveal themselves under ordinary pressure. During the second inconvenience, when repair costs time and nobody is watching, that is where trust is built, or quietly removed. The unapologized life did not make him less human. It made him harder to fool. Back in the kitchen, Mike wipes the screwdriver with a paper towel and drops it into the top drawer where the batteries, tape measure, and one Allen key live together without explanation. The house smells like cooling coffee, dish soap, and the faint metallic air from the garage when the inside door does not fully seal. The drawer handle no longer moves. He pulls it once more anyway. This is not drama. This is inspection. The chipped mug is dry now. The keys are still in the ceramic bowl by the door. His boots wait beneath them, ready for morning, lined up the way he once wished the rest of life would line up if everyone did what they said they would do. Somewhere under all of this is the boy from 1978. The boy with the key under his shirt. The boy standing in the quiet house, listening to the refrigerator hum, knowing not to open the door, knowing not to make trouble, knowing that nobody was to come back and explain the parts that hurt. So the boy learned function. The man kept it. He does not wait for apologies because waiting never unlocked anything. He does not trust speeches because speeches never fix the handle. He trusts what repeats, what holds, what gets repaired after it breaks. If you know a man who learned early not to wait for, sorry, send this to him. He probably will not say much. That does not mean he missed it.